If you want to, you can keep talking as well. Just do it at a low volume. It's fine. We're just going to do a kind of Q&A chat session because we can learn what motivations we all have, why we're all here, and why music matters, and why it matters so much to David, especially. Again, want to thank Vincent Freeman for being such an incredible sound engineer. I want to thank Phil Henry for being such an amazing opening act, and our live stream audience. And I want to thank all of you that are here in the middle of nowhere, right? My brother, when I moved here, he said, "You live in the middle of nowhere." And he's from like Vermont, right? Southern Vermont, in the middle of nowhere. He thinks this is the middle of nowhere. So kind of is. But really appreciate you all braving your way. We talked about having a dog in each of our laps, but pretty sure it's not going to work out. David Rovics, I can't thank you enough. What an incredible set. What an incredible artist you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and making this all happen. I took a few questions from the audience. I don't know that I got them all. If there are any kicking around, they're on these little yellow slips of paper. So if you haven't found them, there's pens also. Write one down, bring it over to us. If there's anything from the live stream, also let us know. So I thought I'd start with a couple of the audience questions. Here's a quick one. What's your favorite acoustic guitar and why?
Gosh, that's a tough one because I mean it depends on like how long it's been played and whether like over time they sound so much better. So I guess I'm a big fan of Collings, which is I have a Collings and. But yeah, there's so many other beautiful instruments out there. Martin makes a lot of good, nice ones. I don't know.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I have the live stream audience can't see it, but I have a portrait by a great musician and artist, obviously, a painting of Willie Nelson, a multimedia thing up here. And of course, he talk about age and a guitar, right? Trigger, is that the name of his guitar? And he's got it like literally like every kind of glue and duct tape and whatever kind of keeps it together. How does that work?
Well, I mean, if I've had guitars that get dropped like by the airlines, and then like they have damage and they need to get repaired, and then when a guitar gets repaired, that can sometimes really deaden the sound, and so I've had bad experiences with guitars getting damaged and not sounding good so much after that. But if they don't get damaged, they just get better over time if it's a nice guitar. So yeah, I've had guitars that I traveled a lot with, and they just got better over time. And then sometimes they get holes in them that they're not supposed to be there, and you have to like get another guitar, or try to fix the one that has the hole in it. But then it might not sound so good afterwards. So
Right.
yeah, they don't seem to last forever, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Somehow he is.
Mine don't.
Yeah. Here is another question. Sorry. Are your stories provided by travel or a personal draw toward certain events or something else?
I get probably most of my stories from traveling and talking to people, and it's just a wonderful way to like see the world and do gigs in places where people know that you write songs about history, and so once that kind of gets out there, then people with interesting stories tend to come find me and tell me a story, and so that's definitely but also reading books and hearing listen to the news a lot and all sorts of different sources like that. Historians.
Right.
Yeah, the dog.
So
has
it is
something to say.
informed by. It is informed. You said the first thing was travel. He's upset because this is his chair.
Yeah. I traveled with a cat. I was Robert Hoyt was a wonderful singer-songwriter from Georgia, later Indiana, and he had a paraplegic cat named Claude that he traveled with for many years throughout the life of that cat, which was like 9 years. and the cat sat in his passenger seat of his car. And somebody made a wonderful little documentary about him called Travels with Claude, about his travels with the cat. But when I was his bass player, I took Claude's seat, and Claude was very unhappy about that the whole time we were touring together, and let me know, like with his claws, and I was frequently bleeding on that tour, but it was still a good time.
Yeah, he must have. Yeah, with just the
He had huge arms, like because he was paraplegic.
Right. He was
So his
dragging
front
his
legs
back.
were like absolutely like muscle bound.
Right.
When you got yours.
Have
Yeah,
you
really.
have you written a song yet about this? 'Cause,
No, I haven't.
ooh, I was just saying it's pretty rich.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think he's like trying to kick me out to hang with you.
Uh-huh.
He's like, so, yeah, it's opposite. So maybe it's Claude's revenge or something. I don't know. Yeah, so much there. Like thinking about the early days for you, I don't know much about you except I think I heard in another interview you had some classically trained parents maybe, or that was kind of the world you were in, right? What was is there, I should say, a catalyzing moment for you, music, or catalyzing moment in activism, or was it just kind of became part of you?
I mean, so I was raised by classical musicians, and my mother was always politically engaged in various ways, and so I was introduced to a lot of the kinds of things, the kinds of topics I'm singing about at an early age, from like the things that she was getting in the mail, and also because of her efforts, I was hooked up with like all sorts of interesting alternative kind of, like I went to Row Camp in Western Massachusetts, Row Junior High Camp, and that's where I first discovered protests against nuclear reactors, which Row used to have, and I discovered the musicians who came through there, like Al Giordano was one of them, and he would come through and visit and sing anti-war songs, anti-nuke songs, and that was my first taste of this whole thing. It wasn't like I was 12 and I decided this is what I was going to do, but that was definitely my first real taste of this whole thing and how powerful it could be and how galvanizing music could be for people and how it could be such a great tool for education as well as creating community and so many wonderful things that music can do.
In that one of the other interviews I heard you talk about just this, I'm always struggling to understand why music is so damn important to all of us. And I've said this before, like art, you can ask everybody, what are your 5 favorite poems? What are your 5 favorite paintings? What are your whatever? What are your 5? And they might not be able to necessarily answer all those, but you ask them, what are your 5 favorite songs? And they can't stop. It's like there's a where do I start kind of thing. What do you think is the reason that music in particular as an art touches us so much?
There was a study. Now it might have been like 10 years ago or something, or maybe more. I can't remember. Time does, but anyway, at some point in the past decade or two, there was a study of the impact of music and words sung and how they affect your brain, and they discovered something that musicians have always known, which is that they go straight to the emotional centers of the brain. That they get processed differently, and musicians have always known that. It's why it's so powerful to tell stories that rhyme and are sung, because they just they sink right in and they get right past all these little alarm bells that might otherwise go off if you're just talking about these things, and you don't need to use so many of those words that are going to bother people. If you're talking in a song, you can find ways to say things without using those words that are going to trigger people, like partisan types of words. You can avoid those in a song much more easily than in speech, I find. People know that around the world. It's such a powerful way to communicate. Social movements around the world have long known this. It's not necessarily something that in the English-speaking world is necessarily remembered by many people. I think we've been made to forget. But in most of the world, any anybody will tell you who's involved with the social movement, what's the beating heart of the movement? Well, they say music, of course. Duh.
Right. And that unifying element of words, and you use the word partisan. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but words can be used in very insidious ways as cudgels, right?
Yeah.
And we see that a whole lot. But some of the you also mentioned Algier Dan, is that right? Or I'm sorry, there was an artist in Western Massachusetts that first sort of.
Al Giordano. Al Giordano. Yeah, more known as a journalist, but back when I was 12 and he was 21, he was a singer-songwriter and anti-nuke activist.
Right. And I just happened to think of Nina Simone because she came from a classical background and went deep into the civil rights movement and jazz and really took some chances. Mississippi Goddamn and so many of her other songs as well. That kind of rides the line of being not only a cudgel but a wake-up call too, using language. The way that you described it is so unifying to be able to use language in a way that that is not partisan, that speaks to that beating heart thing. Who are your early influences besides that journalist you mentioned?
Oh, definitely Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie. I discovered Bob Dylan somewhere along the way, and as a teenager, Buffy St. Marie, all sorts of people, and then all sorts of people that most people have never heard of. When I moved to Seattle, I first heard Jim Page when I was like 19, and I was completely blown away. He's one of the best songwriters on the planet that most people have never heard of. And there's just so many others I discovered. I guess 25 years ago, Rob Johnson, R-O-B-B, Rob Johnson from Brighton, England, another one of the most amazing songwriters on the planet that hardly anybody's ever heard of. But as far as like songs about history and songs about global events, these two are two of the best. And Christy Moore I discovered somewhere along the line. And one thing leads to another, and then there's just the whole, it's a Pandora's box of good stuff.
Your first album was what year?
Well, it depends on whether we're talking about the first one that I'd actually want to admit to having recorded, or
on the handheld in fifth grade.
I recorded a bunch of stuff prior to 1993 that I wouldn't want to necessarily be, associated with, and I don't think there's any of those recordings anywhere outside of my mother's top drawer. But after 1993, I started writing songs that were good, and it was really, it was the experience that I had in 1993 that basically turned me into a decent songwriter. Was my best friend was shot to death when we went out one night in San Francisco, and and I was overwhelmed by grief for a long time, and the experience of that grief is kind of like doing ecstasy or like a whole lot of acid, or I don't know what from my previous before 1993. That's the closest I could come to kind of explaining the experience. But it was like with that much grief, I just didn't have the capacity to put myself in a box anymore. Like I always was able to somehow, that my ego was always telling me like I'm a white middle class man from the suburbs of New York City, and that was an incredible drag on being able to relate to other people and to be able to communicate and to be able to write good songs, because I was always coming back to this idea that I'm this person and I can only write from some kind of weird, whatever that might be, some kind of white middle class radical male Connecticut perspective. I don't know but it just didn't work in terms of writing good songs, because I wasn't really, telling stories and relating to people. I was really telling people what I thought, which is a terrible way to try to communicate. Actually, if you tell people what your opinions are, then you don't really they don't really have the chance to form their own opinions. You got to tell stories and let people think for themselves if you want to communicate, I think. But that's what I figured out at that point was like, and what made me be able to tell good stories at that point and learn how to do that was the realization that we're all humans and that actually all these, like he was killed in the Mission District in San Francisco, which at that time actually had a lot of Latinos living in it, not just running restaurants, but they actually lived there. And there was like overwhelming, they were refugees from El Salvador, Guatemala, and that was like, I knew that was the case, but I hadn't really noticed viscerally. And, suddenly looking at everybody's faces, I saw that they had all lost people like I had, and probably a lot more in most cases, and even more violent circumstances. And you could see it on their faces. And that's when I realized we're all human beings, and I can tell a story from any other human being and relate to what they've experienced because I know that I can relate to them because I'm also human. And I didn't realize that until I had to experience enough grief to realize that. I don't necessarily think everybody else needs to experience it that way, but it's very helpful to sort of blow your ego out of your brain and actually relate to people in a real way instead of in your own little social constructed box.
Yeah, and getting out of your own ego, like you said,
Yeah.
that's key,
Mm-hmm.
or it was for you.
Yeah.
Because maybe you were in that box, like you just described, of feeling like, you said 1993, and I keep thinking of Wayne's World and the "I'm not worthy" thing, and maybe some of that, like literally, maybe you didn't feel worthy enough to tell your own story, necessarily give advice or your opinion, until something like really punched you in the gut and said, wait a minute, this did affect me and I'm a human and I'm just,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, Dylan, his first, couple hours were amazing, and he wrote all these, told all these incredible stories from all kinds of different perspectives. And then later, he decided that, I think around 1966 or so, he said, you have to write about what you know. Just write about what you know, which has nothing to do with what he was doing before that. When he wrote so much of his greatest stuff, he wasn't writing from what he knew. He wasn't writing from his perspective. He was writing from like the perspective of a woman in northern Michigan who works in a coal mine or something. I mean, he's never been a woman. He's never worked in a coal mine, but he wrote amazing songs from the perspective of a woman working in a coal mine. I mean, this is. So anybody can do that. You just have to stop thinking that you can't do that. Really, because we're all human beings and we can all relate to each other. This is just a fact. I don't consider it a opinion. It's just that's how it is. We're all humans and we can relate to each other if we let ourselves and if we stop thinking that because we are from whatever background that we can't relate to other people. But we're all told by identity politics these days more than ever before in human history, as far as I know, that if you're not from that specific, very particular background, you can't write from that perspective because you can't possibly understand that perspective. And that is just absolutely objective nonsense.
Yeah, yeah. There's a fiction, for fiction writers, a lot of kids are taught write what you know. Also, and I've always found that to be really lazy.
Yeah.
Because it hems you in, to a certain thing, and I think it discourages fiction writing or creative writing in general.
Massively.
Yeah, right. I'm a better anarchist than you. You played that today. That was great. I always love hearing that song. It makes me think, 'cause you're from Portland, Oregon. I think of Portlandia and how it has a capacity for self-mockery. We can talk about where we lost that, but talk about that song a little, if you would.
Yeah, so I mean, I think these days the circular firing squad is more of a problem than it's been any time in my lifetime, for sure. And I blame that on social media and the algorithms and the way it pushes up in disinformation and hostility and disagreements and pushes down any kind of reasonable discourse. But I wrote "I'm a Better Anarchist" before that, and but even whether it's before social media or since social media, the most sort of good thing about that song is that most of its fans are young left-wingers who are very much coming out of that whole scene, but who are capable of seeing, the sort of ridiculousness of it and the excesses and the holier than thou aspects of it, and they're the ones who think the song is funny. So it gives me some hope for it's definitely really important to remember that if you see all this stuff on the internet or wherever, all this crazy talk, it's not representative of of most people of any generation, including young people today, most of whom think all that stuff is ridiculous. But you're not going to see those voices amplified on social media algorithms. You got to meet those people and realize, or just look at Spotify and look at my listeners, and you can see like, this is the song they like the best of all the songs. This is the one they're listening to the most.
Yeah, and it takes on. Talk about. You have so many serious themes in your music. So many really important, trenchant, current event themes. What is, in your mind, the difference between, how do you reach people? I'm trying to form a question. Is it, are there different kinds of people that you can reach through humor versus really hard-hitting, I'm going to tell it to you straight kind of stuff? What's your experience with how you communicate through words to different people that way?
I mean, I think most people can relate to any kinds of these songs, and it really is mostly a matter of how you introduce them to different audiences, and also how you combine them, how you put together a set list. So, like, whether it's going to be more funny songs or more serious songs or different kind of, if you're telling a story that has a really heavy, depressing ending, or you're telling a story that has a more inspiring ending, it's really about mixing those things up in a way that forms a sort of a curve that doesn't leave people feeling too suicidal by the end of the evening. Basically, I mean, right. It's not that the songs, but as by themselves, work or don't work for different audiences. But definitely, you can't do too many depressing songs in a row, and also you can't do too many sort of, upbeat, funny songs in a row. No audience wants to hear too much of any of that. They want to hear a more of a nice balance of different stuff.
Right. Yeah, I once heard Gillian Welch and David Rawlings sort of talking about their set list, and they're like, we're going to start here with a somewhat depressing song, and we're just going to keep going down until it all peters out.
Yeah.
But they didn't mean it. But they didn't really mean it.
But that's the way.
Of course, they have, a balance too.
Yeah.
But
I tend to start out with stuff that's kind of like, nice, interesting stories that aren't too depressing, and then get into the really heavy stuff, and then like drag everybody out of that by the end. Hopefully,
leave them on a high note.
Leave them on a higher note at least.
One of the songs that I love to play on my radio show has been about the Ballad of the USS Liberty. You have a lot of songs about Israel, of course, now, and Palestine, of course. But the Ballad of the USS Liberty, I'm always so curious about. And recently, in the last 6 months, the president of the group that the veterans,
the survivors
of the USS Liberty, came out and said, "Yeah, this all happened. Here's how it went down." How did you wrote that song a long time ago, though, right? Maybe talk to that song and what it's about.
Yeah, I wrote it only just like I guess around a year ago or something. And
I was thinking it was older. Okay.
No, and when did I first hear about the USS Liberty?
I've obviously played it way too much because I thought it was old.
Yeah, I can't remember when I first heard about it, but it was definitely during the course of the Israel's war on Gaza that I was writing. I've written a lot of songs about that, several dozen, and since October 23. But along with songs that are like specifically about different events that have taken place there, like different massacres that I've written songs about. I've also been writing more songs about the history of the whole conflict there, and I think the USS Liberty incident is definitely one of the most censored bits of history of this country that has ever been censored. And I think a lot of people just don't even have a way to conceptualize or what happened. But briefly, what happened, for anybody that doesn't know, is during the war in 1967 between Israel and most of their neighbors. There was a NSA spy ship off the coast of the Gaza Strip that was monitoring the war, and then Israel, for whatever reason, and there's a lot of speculation about why, possibly that they were committing extrajudicial executions of Egyptian soldiers that the NSA ship was filming. And they, the Israeli military then attacked the ship, and despite the American flags on it, despite the crew all communicating in American accented English, telling them we're Americans, like what are you doing? But for 4 hours, the Israeli military sent planes and ships. Waves and waves of them to drop 1-ton bombs on the ship, to rain napalm down on everybody repeatedly, strafing it with machine gun fire, attacking any crew that tried to escape the ship and killing them. They killed 34 Americans and wounded, I think, 180. And they nearly sank the ship, which was what they were trying to do. But despite it being like a 20-year-old World War II era ship at the time, and totally not, state of the art by any means, and not very fast, and not very well armored, and it was a spy ship, not a war ship. But the ship didn't sink, and eventually, after some hours, and after the Soviet Navy offered to help them, they called off the attack, and then the ship limped into the bay, and so eventually, people found out this had happened. They were told by President Johnson not to talk about it, and to not to talk about what happened, and a lot of them didn't, and eventually some of them did.
And there had been calls to the Secretary of Defense and even up to the White House, right? To, hey, this is going on.
Yeah, it got all the way up to the White House, and President Johnson said, basically, we don't want to make bad relations with Israel, and they didn't tell them to stop bombing the ship until 4 hours of the military attacks, and then there was there were American planes that were scrambled and sent over to the ship, and then sent back before they got there by Johnson himself, who told them to go back, don't help them.
Yeah, it's a chapter that nobody knows about. I was so grateful to hear your song, and then I guess simultaneous. I thought it was older. I thought I'd been playing it for a long time, but just in the spring, this president of the Veterans Association for the USS Liberty came out with that story and broke his silence, which was great. There's so many songs that you have that talk about war, of course. I wrote down here, "Who Would Jesus Bomb?" That's just in the title. Combine both. That's like, Shakespearean or something. It's both comic and tragic, but what a heavy song that is too.
It's so hard to imagine how Christians can justify imperialism, but of course there's lots of them that do, like George W. Bush and Tony Blair and so many others. But the Bible is so full of all kinds of stuff about how you're not supposed to be, killing other people, and certainly not supposed to be bombing them, and it's full of all kinds of stuff about that not being the way that Jesus says you're supposed to do things. So it's hard to imagine. So I think the question, who would Jesus bomb? I was being sort of accosted by by a man in a Whole Foods market in Houston. I had a picture of George W. Bush and the words "international terrorist" on it, and I had 5 of those T-shirts. I used to wear them all the time in like 2003, 2004. And this guy came up to me pointing at the picture of George Bush, and he was shaking, and he said, "He's a man of God, he's a man of God." And I said, "Oh, well, who would Jesus bomb?" And he just looked shocked and had no idea how to respond to that question. And I thought, oh, I should make a song with that chorus. That's clearly a good one.
Yeah, quick refutation of that kind of thinking, because it's just it's so easily corruptible in the mind of so many people. I don't understand it either. Never have.
No.
I remember Conor Oberst back in those days from Bright Eyes, went on Jay Leno with his cowboy hat and his boots and mocked George Bush, terribly. It was beautiful. Beautiful moment. I forgot the name of the song, but I wanted to ask, you played it tonight. I've heard it a few times in the last few weeks about the 3-year-old. It's a new song, and you said there's a million more, talking about a Gaza killing. What's the name of that song again?
Song for a Photograph.
Okay. And that, that's a really powerful song too. That I don't know, just I keep remembering a million more. And as the war and the genocide in Gaza keeps going on, we know these stories are repeating, and the numbers keep climbing, and I'm hearing 300, 400,000 now maybe is what's being suggested by some official authorities. I don't know where. One of the albums, and David put out 3 albums in the last year. One of them was named Notes on a Holocaust.
Yeah, Notes from a Holocaust.
Yeah, and I was looking forward to that, and I couldn't get it because YouTube had censored it, right? Because of the word Holocaust, I guess, and then they put it in parentheses from a bad thing.
No,
or something,
on Spotify, right? Spotify took it down, and I think because of the title. Yeah. And then when I put it back up again as Notes from a parentheses bad thing, because obviously Holocaust was the word that got it taken down, it's stayed up ever since. So it seems to be okay to say Notes from a bad thing, but you can't say Notes from a Holocaust on Spotify. There's apparently only one Holocaust that you're allowed to refer to on Spotify.
Yeah. This has happened a lot in the last 5 years. Censorship.
Lots of it, yeah. I've been permanently demonetized from YouTube, and it's and definitely shadow banned on Bandcamp, and had my Facebook account severely disabled with no notification about it. But I can't use the invite feature on events. I'm prevented from using it, although they never said that was the case. It is the case, though. So, yeah.
We might have a hungry dog who thinks electronics are tasty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The wires, yum.
Yeah, that's probably not.
Yeah,
probably
nice
not going to be that edible. Yeah. How about a hand for Robbie? Yeah,
Robbie.
I heard in this other interview recently you did, and I'm amazed at the prolific nature of your canon. Like, 65 songs in 2 years since October 7th, and I was distracted vacuuming or something. I don't know. Who am I kidding? I don't clean. But like 65 songs since October 7th, and I started to hear you say, I kind of got the sense that you try to document this thing, or right?
As much as I can.
Is that about right?
Yeah, just trying to, like, all the news that's fit to sing, as Phil Oakes said, So, and of course, it's like way too much happening, far too many massacres, far too many, all kinds of developments to possibly even keep track of, let alone document. But at least I've documented 65 of them, and it's, yeah. And I would never do more than a few of those songs in a concert because it's just too much, But they're all out there anyway.
How do you do it in your personal life, though? Like, how do you stay sane looking at this horror, and you keep going back for more. You know, I mean, or you're compelled, or you know, I mean, I say that flippantly, but I don't mean to be flippant. It's a compulsion that a lot of people don't understand.
No, it's true, and a lot of people turn away from it, and I understand why they would, because they feel like they can't do anything about it, and just watching it just makes them feel like killing themselves or something, and it's just too much, and it is completely overwhelming, and the only thing that keeps me sane, one of the only things is writing about it. You know, as long as I can take this horrible stuff and turn it into songs and get, you know, communicate with people that way and get it out there, and you know, and then meet people at shows who are feeling the same way that I'm feeling about all this horrible stuff, and that's all, you know, that kind of, you know, community is incredibly important, which is one of the many reasons I'm so glad the pandemic is over. But it's really it's so hard for so many people, and so many people are so overwhelmed by it. And you know, if they're not watching Western news and they actually know what's happening, but it's really overwhelming, yeah, for me, and I think everybody else who's not turned away from it. But yeah, if you're in somewhere where there's a lot of protesting going on and various kinds, and that can be a good thing for a lot of people to find community that way. Although, if the protests don't have music at them, then they're very depressing, and then they don't really help people feel any better. So, yeah. And that's been a big problem for years now in this country, with protests not having any music anymore, because we've all been told that music is something associated with frivolous, drug-addled hippies, and we can't play music at protests because it's not serious or whatever. However, they've managed to convince themselves that it's a bad idea. It's something that hardly ever happens anymore at protests anywhere in this country. Live music, it's starting to change just in the past few weeks. It's starting to improve a little, but it's been a big problem for a long time, and it's not at all helpful.
That's a great point. I hadn't really thought about that much, and I haven't been to too many protests, but except locally, you know, anti-war stuff. So I haven't been to any big ones in recent years. But Occupy Wall Street, were you there? Was there any music there?
Oh yeah, Occupy was very musical, but it's been like really in the past, like a few years after Occupy is when it became. I mean, it was really soon after. That was the last movement we had that was so musical. And I was singing at Occupy camps all over the country during Occupy, and they, you know, the whole movement was all way into music. But things changed after that.
Yeah, and the situation's only gotten worse in our society.
Yeah, worse and worse. Like you know, so because with identity politics dominating the left, you know, anybody who's getting on a stage to sing music, well, they whatever they're singing about, they have to be from whatever group it is that they're singing about. So it makes it all very much more complicated. So, like, if you're singing about like U.S. imperialism in Mexico or something, you have to be Mexican to sing about that. You can't be somebody from the U.S. singing about that, because you don't have the right identity, and then which is like. Well, great if you can get Mexicans on the stage to sing about U.S. imperialism in Mexico, that's fantastic, and I'm not at all saying that that's a bad thing. It's just that what ends up happening is that once you have those kinds of requirements for everybody on the stage who's going to do anything has to be very specifically from some kind of group, what you end up effectively doing is getting rid of music on the stage, because you can't be so, you can't be so nitpicky about the free music you're trying to find for an all-volunteer-run demonstration. And, I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You can't it's really hard to get a band to play at a demo because there's too much logistics involved. You have to pay them. You have to rent a truck. There has to be you have to be able to transport a drum set. You know, it's far more complicated than just like a solo or a duo with one acoustic instrument, you know. And then you're going to be you're going to be tending white that way because of, and we can talk about that all night. But the whole
privilege and
history of the
getting
music industry, banjos are not a white instrument. Banjos are traditionally both, a very black tradition, but because of the music industry, which is a fundamentally racist phenomenon and has been since the beginning, they've convinced us, that bluegrass is a white thing and banjos is like a white instrument. It never used to be. It's just in our minds now. People don't even remember that it was most of the best black banjo players in the 19th century were black, and everybody knew that. And everybody learned, all the white banjo players learned from black banjo players in the beginning. And then we've all, forgotten this history, including most black people in the country have no idea. But, that's... So bluegrass, it doesn't need to be a white or a black thing. It can just be music for everybody. We don't need to be put into these boxes. It's the music industry that's been doing that for a century now. But rock and roll bands are mostly white. Most of the rock singers in the 50s and 60s are white men, and specifically white men, not women, not black, but specifically white men. And that was the music industry. They required that. You had to be a white man to be a rock singer. If you were somebody else like Janis Joplin or Melissa Etheridge, you were considered unusual, and they would talk about how novel this is. There's a white woman singing soul music, or there's a woman a rock singer. Wow, there's so few of them. I wonder why. It's because they were not allowed to be in the bands.
Right, right. So it's a top down. It's been a top down approach from
the beginning. Like rhythm and blues is for black people, rock and roll's for white people. The rhythm and blues bands can play in the black areas. The rock and roll bands can play anywhere. But it's all been a very planned thing by a racist industry that has a very much political agenda. And there's been some good books about this too. Matt Callahan's book, The Trouble with Music, if you want to know more about the music industry and how messed up it's been from the very beginning.
Yeah, it sounds like in recent years we've seen greater and greater examples of divide and conquer, the striation of society and striation of people. What you said, I can't represent somebody else even if I have a similar experience because of whatever attributes I have. Mm-hmm. It's a very top-down approach. And gets into this idea of, this is a kind of a form of population control or keeping us. Music is the great unifier, right? We just said that. You just described it beautifully. And if it's the great unifier, and you aren't now allowed to sing about the experiences of a Latino man coming into America. They're breaking that unification down. They're creating further division.
And I think it's very intentional. If this whole idea wasn't come up with by the FBI, then whoever came up with it should have been working for the FBI. But I know it's a more complicated phenomenon than just any one thing. Like this was a plan, But I think the people who have put out that message that you can't be this or that if you want to say this or that, and it all has to be regimented, and everybody has to be divided into their little identity silos that get more and more narrow over time. This is a perfect ideology for divide and conquer of a society, and if the FBI didn't come up with this particular brand of identity politics, then somebody should have been working for the FBI. But if you look at the history of the FBI since their inception, their whole purpose as an organization, as we all learned in 1971 when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI raided the FBI offices in Media, Pennsylvania, and liberated 1,000 secret documents and exposed COINTELPRO to the world. So then we learned that the FBI, from its inception, has always been all about dividing and conquering the American left. That's been its purpose from the beginning. First, it was the industrial workers of the world and the communists, and then it was the civil rights movement, and then it was the anti-war movement, the Black Power movement. They've always been involved with assassinating people and with spreading disinformation and rumor mongering and everything possible to divide and conquer the American left. That's been their purpose. So if we know a lot less about what they've been doing since the raid on the offices in 1971, but we can be sure that they've been doing the same stuff since then that they were doing before that. And assuming that is the case, then of course they've been working since then to make sure that music is not part of any kind of activist scene in this country because they all saw what happened in the 60s, which was that the movement was so musical and so powerful that it demilitarized the hearts and minds of millions of young Americans and other Americans, and became a serious problem for getting people to fight in Vietnam, which so many American soldiers were refusing to do. And a lot of that refusal is down to music. Not all of it by any means, but a lot of it is down to the music that was part of that whole scene. And we're talking about whether they were black or white or Latino, it was all over the whole scene, whether you're talking about the music coming out of California or Michigan or wherever. There's a lot of very political music that shaped the narrative for millions of people in a way that the state was not able to do. And that was something that had to be stopped, or at least it couldn't be stopped, but it had to be. This can't happen again,
It's really interesting, the history of music. Like in the 50s, it seems like it could be commercially successful because it was safe themes, and then as people grew awareness in the 60s, and these wars started to happen after JFK was assassinated, they wrote it for a while, right, for commercial profit. But at some point, they decided, and then there's the whole theory about the Southern all the musicians that came out of the valley there as well, that may or may not have been, sons and daughters of some of the intelligence in America too.
I mean, that whole theory. I think it's more what the idea that there's all these rock musicians that famous rock musicians that are related to important intelligence leaders and military leaders and stuff. It's all true, but it doesn't mean that they were put into that position because of that. This is a very militarized society. There's so many people working in the military and working in the CIA and all that kind of stuff. And the people that become rock stars are rarely from the bottom 80% of society. They're very frequently, if not the vast majority of them, are from the top quintile, just like anybody else that you ever have heard of. Anybody who gets famous, anybody who's a famous author, a famous musician, a famous playwright, a famous conductor, the vast majority of them did not grow up in poverty. They went to private schools, and they grew up in households where, by modern standards, were making the equivalent of six-figure incomes or more. And they do not represent the majority of the American population. And it's reflected in who their parents are, who are often, corporate leaders and, business leaders and CEO or, leaders in the military. That's just how it is when you're in the top quintile.
Right. It opens up into the whole labor versus capital thing. And you had mentioned a minute ago, I don't want to lose it, I just want to mention it now, that you see an upswing, and I'm thinking of Jesse Wells and some of these other folks, but I wanted to pause and ask, I asked you how you stay sane. How do you find a partner to sing with you and harmonize with you on some of these things, and how does she stay sane?
How do you stay sane? Have a seat.
I'll start with the how do I stay sane, might as well. Just because, I think it's a combination of music is really important and protest is really important. I think I'm lucky in Australia compared with how it is in the US, certainly as far as the solidarity movement with the Palestinian people. And this is something that is very present in the world, that there is a globally massive, sustained movement in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We've been coming out and coming out and coming out again, and I think when we come out in big numbers, it makes a huge difference to how you feel. A lot of people have been coming out because it's the right thing to do, and we've had plenty of small or smallish protests, and a lot of kudos to people who stand on street corners and just do it because it's the right thing to do. just over a month ago in my city, Maganjan, Brisbane, there were 50,000 of us and it was a national day of protest action. There were 300,000 people. It's a country of about 30 million, so that's actually quite a lot of the population was in the streets that weekend. And in Maganjan, Brisbane, that there were 50,000 people. I didn't have to say to myself afterwards, well, that was good to do. I'm glad I did that. It was like, whoa, this has been great. So that it does make a difference. We in Australia have yet to stop our government from allowing exports of weapons parts to Israel. And I mean, I saw that there were some people in Amsterdam in the last couple of days putting themselves on railway tracks and getting beaten up by the police, but trying to stop shipments. No, they weren't in Amsterdam, it was Rotterdam. They were trying to stop shipments of weapons parts to Israel. And I think we need to do that, because clearly just protesting hasn't been enough to stop the complicity of our governments. But it certainly creates hope when there's a lot of us, because that makes you realise, well, for one thing, you're not at home crying and feeling alone, you're with other people. And I think coming together in songs, I mean, I feel very privileged to be able to sing with David. I've known his music since the early 2000s or late 1990, probably 1999, I think. Or just anyway, I've been listening to his music, and my partner and I started organising gigs for David, and I've been very lucky to be able to work with and sing with him. But having been to a lot of his concerts as well, not singing with him, I can certainly say that events like this and all sorts of musical events where people can come together, or where we can come and eat together. I mean, there was a wonderful protest during Ramadan in 2024 in Maganjan, Brisbane, where we ate together. And that was what we did. Like, there were some speakers, and then we ate together. So eating and drinking, dancing, if that works, song, it's a that does feel good and it does help you stay sane. And when we cry together and feel angry together, that's collective, and I think it's good for us. So that's it. That's what I have to say about that.
I am curious with just media is you mentioned Western media. As long as you don't pay attention to Western media, something like that before, and I don't know if Australia is more restrictive or not.
It's the worst.
It's
the Australian media is the
right?
worst of the Western world, I think, probably.
Right. And how does ours compare to?
It's hard to compare because it's so horrible here. But if you compare ABC and NPR, ABC is probably even a little worse. But yeah, it all sucks,
Yeah, it's there's so much infiltration inside of all Western media. They've figured out a profit motive, though. I mean, Fox was the first on the right to really figure out how to make a lot of money directing people in one direction, and then it seems like lots of the other.
MSNBC must have been the second if Fox was the first.
Right.
I mean, it just we developed this liberal conservative media ecosystem, and then suddenly protests that never used to get any media attention at all, like for my entire life up until 2005, suddenly we're getting all kinds of media attention from both the liberal and conservative media, and that's what's been happening since then. That's why they all want to come to Portland, because for one reason or another, they all want to see, the tear gas and the rocks flying, and they all can pitch it however they want to. Whereas it would have been 20 years ago, nobody would have been paying attention to protests at an immigration office.
Right, but if they can use it to stoke division and keep people fighting, and we're seeing that more and more and more. It's so strange. If you question your own assumptions, if you question your own party, now you're blacklisted, right? And you've experienced that a whole lot.
Yeah, lots of. I've been. I am. There are actively groups trying to cancel all my gigs who are associated with Antifa, and there are groups that are trying to cancel all my gigs that are associated with Israel. So that's I got it coming from both directions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insidious. I hate to overuse that word, but it is.
It is.
And there was a group last year that came together from both left and right. They couldn't quite embrace everybody. Brett Weinstein was one of the organizers. It was in D.C. This stopped the, I forget, but it certainly didn't get any of the play that this No King stuff got.
No,
right?
Nobody wanted to see that
people
kind of
coming
thing.
together.
Yeah,
God forbid, right?
No.
And there was a lot of folks they were starting to pull together, and to me, that's. I want to segue right into your songs, Tax the Rich and Deport the Billionaires, because I think that's a great place to start. I'm not saying this on the internet, am I? Anyway.
No, that's what we need, yeah.
Yeah, that Deport the Billionaires.
Yeah, we not
That's
our
a new one?
Neighbors, deport the billionaires. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, we didn't do that one tonight.
Yeah, I kind of wanted that one. My God. What are segue to the new voices that might be coming up? This kid Jesse Wells, he's what? I don't know how old he is, 32 or something. Maybe not even 30. But
No, he's 30 something, and he's brilliant. Yeah, I love his music. Yeah,
he's almost as prolific as you.
he's more. I mean, I'm astounded at how fast he puts out songs. I'm humbled and astounded.
Are there others?
Yeah, there's a lot of others, and mostly they didn't get anything close to how famous he got. And I believe he is on a major record label, which and there may be some money involved with the fact that he gets 500,000 views within a few hours every time he puts out a song. But he is brilliant, and I don't want to detract from that. But I think it's also probably good for people to know that the people that get the most views are often getting help. It's but Carsey Blanton, she's fantastic. Probably about less than 1/10 as famous as Jesse Wells or less, but she's not on a major label. But she's wonderful, and there's a woman from England, Grace Petrie, is just a fantastic modern songwriter, writing about all this kind of, what's going on in the world, different aspects of it. And there's lots of young folks and lots of older folks who are writing great stuff.
Well, there's this Mary Cutter girl. She does a song called "The Devil Wore a Lab Coat," and then just last week I heard this woman Julie Lavery talking about response to "My Life as a Showgirl," the new Taylor Swift album, and she spoke to it at the beginning and said, basically, and whenever I always want to do the Bernie impression, but at a time in our country, right, and I could do the Bernie, but I won't, but at a time in our world, right, when there's so much to talk about, and I have no shade on Taylor Swift. I don't know her music, and I have no opinion. But this artist was saying she's writing an album about her life as a showgirl with the biggest megaphone in the world of music over the last 20 years. And what's going on here?
I mean, it's just the music industry. There's if you look at the past couple of years of Israel committing genocide. And, you look at the number of prominent artists who have said anything about it other than, I want the ceasefire, ceasefire now or whatever. But anybody who's actually written anything about it, you can count on, a couple of hands. It's really
where's Eddie Vedder right now?
I mean, where's I don't want to put people on the spot, but where's you name it? Where the
Roger
famous
Waters
where
takes so much heat.
Oh, Roger Waters
takes
is amazing.
So much heat.
Why aren't there more artists? I mean, you can see with what the kind of problems he has, you can see why other artists don't want to go there. But it's I remember when to take an example of an artist who's not nearly like famous like Taylor Swift or something, but who had a good following in the folk scene. I don't know if people know Chuck Brodsky from North Carolina, brilliant songwriter. when after 9/11, when he and all the threats of invasion and the invasions, and he started speaking out against U.S. imperialism, by his own account, he lost half his audience. But he started out, not particularly political, and then got political. So he lost half his audience. It's not a problem I would have because I started out being political, but it's that's the kind of fear. And then of course they'd get dropped by the record labels. They'd get told that they're anti-Semites. They would stop. Look what happens to Kneecap. I mean, they got really famous, but they can't tour in a lot of places now because they're all being told that they're terrorist sympathizers and everything. So they don't want to see people massacring children.
Yeah. What is your advice to new artists or new songwriters in this environment?
I mean, there's so many things you could say as far as advice goes, but it's a really difficult profession to go into. Whether you're going to be, if you're not going to, in all likelihood, you're never going to have a record label, no matter how good you are, and you're never going to get anything close to as famous like somebody like Taylor Swift, but if you want to have a career in the industry, whatever's left of the industry, the same rules apply now that applied decades ago, which is if you get political, your career is over. But, if you're not trying to get famous and be on one of the major record labels and you just want to write songs about things that matter to you and sing them to your potential audience and make recordings and all that, you can do that. You don't need the record labels, but if you want to be really famous, don't write songs about Palestine.
Right.
It won't help your career.
There's one guy, this guy Oliver Anthony. I don't think that's his real name.
No, but he's also brilliant.
Yeah, he has flipped the bird to the record companies and said no, I'm not doing it, and he somehow maintained an internet presence. I don't know exactly how.
Yeah, I mean. He has some very professional people working with him, and there's all kinds of professional production going on. That is not like with Oliver Anthony and with Jesse Wells. This is not one person standing there recording with his phone. That's just what they want it to look like,
right.
and they do that really well. And any famous artist always has a rags to riches story, or just a rags story, or about how they were writing all these songs in their brother's bedroom, and that they didn't have a studio, and all. That's the PR, and sometimes it might be true, and other times it's not. It's more like their father was a movie producer, and that's why they knew the right people to talk to make a good recording, and that's why they had the chance to become famous musicians in the first place. But I don't know. Oliver Anthony has rejected all the partisan stuff, and that's very impressive because he could have become the Republican whatever. I mean,
right.
And he's gone for just doing his thing and rejecting all that. And I think it says a lot of good things about him.
And it might be a little bit safer than some of the material you take on, which is just, his material is important and absolutely, but it's maybe a little easier to just say Richmond, north of Richmond.
It's a little more vague, yeah. And it's also true of most of what Jesse Wells writes too. Although, he writes about specific stories, but when it comes to certain issues like war and peace, and a lot of it is a bit, stay in a safer, vaguer area.
Right, not necessarily taking a hard stance one way or another. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate.
Thank you so much.
All your time and your performance, and what's next?
We'll have Long Island on Sunday night and Amherst on Tuesday. Yeah.
Right on. And lots of trips to Boston in between.
And lots of trips to Boston in between.
Nice.
Visit my mama.
Yeah, and hoping for the best for you there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I can't thank you enough, and thank everybody here for sticking around, and the folks on the interwebs, as it were, and my dog who's calmed down finally. So, and to Vincent Freeman in the underground
thank you, Vincent.
supports, and For all of us here, I'm Jamie Gage and David Rovics. Thank you so much. And thank you to Phil
you.
Henry as well. Have a great night, everyone.